What I'm suggesting in these videos is that by and large, doubt is not a positive, constructive experience for us as Christians. That's not to say that God in His wisdom and grace can't be involved and redeem our doubt and use it to strengthen us and to help us to grow as Christians. But I'm not sure that it's really something that we should be positing as an intrinsic part of spiritual growth and maturing. In fact, I would say that spiritual growth is about, in part, recognizing that when the living God speaks, when the one who is the embodiment, the very personification of truth, when He speaks, the only response is one of humble and implicit trust in the reliability and the truthfulness of what our God is saying. But actually we know, don't we, from our own experience and from the experience of others that we love in the church, that that's just not always the way it works. That actually we can be assailed by doubt really quite a lot of the time as Christians. And it's important to recognize the complexity of doubt. There are lots of different reasons why people doubt. We're going to look at them in a few moments. Intellectual reasons, moral reasons, spiritual reasons, emotional reasons. And it's important to recognize that, because if somebody is doubting because of emotional reasons, and we try to deal with that doubt at an intellectual level, that's not going to help them very much. Actually, we probably need to realize that any time we are doubting, there's usually a combination of factors at work. As human beings, we are complex phenomena, and our spiritual experience reflects that. When we are doubting, there's usually more than one reason for it. But I'm going to try to break it down into three broad areas and just have a look at each of them with you in the next three videos. And the one that we're going to look at in this video is intellectual doubt. A doubt about things that we know we are supposed to believe as Christians, about who God is, about who we are, about the world that we live in, and about how God relates to us. Now, when it comes to intellectual doubt, I think probably the most common reason for doubting is that we simply forget to remember the truth. It's just what happens when our faith becomes malnourished. We're not cultivating it. We're not, spiritually speaking, eating properly. We're not eating a good enough diet, as it were, and we just forget. We forget who God is. Our minds are still shaped to some extent by the reality of our sinfulness. And because of that, they always tend to veer away from, or to fall away from the truth. Which means that if we are not actively remembering and deliberately recalling to mind the truth of our faith, then actually we will begin to lose a grip on it. We'll begin to forget it. If we're not interrogating our faith so that it grows all the time, then actually it will begin to die. It will fall into decline. And because of the nature of that process, because all it requires is passivity, then the danger is it can be quite advanced before it ever actually comes to the surface. Now, with this stuff in mind, a passage like Deuteronomy chapter 8 becomes incredibly poignant. Over and over again in Deuteronomy 8, we are called to remember who our God is. And actually, God builds into the rhythm of life and worship in the ancient church these constant points where people are called to stop and to remember deliberately who God is and what God has done for them. A big part of worship and a big part of the discipline of spiritual growth is simply the discipline of remembering. And recognizing how easy it is to forget that we are dependent, how easy it is to forget that we are created, how easy it is to forget our need to be forgiven. And we live in a world that is seducing us constantly to forget the truth about what we believe as Christians. And the best way to tackle that is to maintain a well-nourished, exercised faith that is constantly developing and growing and strengthening. If we are really active in pursuing a rigorous, thought-through, biblically informed faith, then that is our first line of defense against the realities of doubt. It's when we begin to forget that we begin to doubt. And so one of the things I want to suggest as a pastor is that we actually are setting ourselves challenges and setting out on adventures in faith so that we are constantly developing and maturing and growing in our understanding of what it means to be a Christian. Now, allied to this very closely is the whole question of theological doubt. Big theological questions about what we believe in. And I'll be honest, over the years, certainly in my early days as a Christian, this was my arena of doubt. This paralyzed me as a Christian. I remember going through college, and it was a very self-consciously liberal and revisionist theological department who seemed to be really quite intentional about undermining my faith as a Christian. And every lecture, every seminar seemed to raise new questions that I didn't have answers to, that I didn't even know if there were answers to them. And I remember kneeling down on the floor in my study one day with the Bible open in front of me and tears running down my cheeks and crying out to God and saying, God, I don't know if you're there. I don't know if this book is true. If you are there, you need to help me. You need to show yourself to me. That can be a very threatening, a very frightening experience to go through. To be so overwhelmed by doubt at an intellectual level. You simply don't know what to believe, or if you can believe the things you know you're supposed to believe as a Christian. Well, let me say this, partly from my own experience. Truth has nothing to be afraid of. Truth can withstand the onslaught of lies. Truth is not fearful of being questioned and of being interrogated. Truth can stand. Part of the problem, though, is that what we believe isn't always the truth. And that can make what we believe feel very fragile. And I think this is one of the ways in which God can redeem the process of our doubt. As we interrogate our faith, or as it is questioned, as we find ourselves confronting big theological and philosophical questions, it can help us sift through what we believe. We can be asking ourselves, is this really what the Bible teaches? Am I really understanding God's word properly? And in that sense, I think God can use our doubt to help us to sift through what we say we believe, so we can work out what's actually truth and what actually is maybe something that we've picked up but is not actually rooted in the Bible. Now, there are healthier ways of growing theologically and philosophically and intellectually as a Christian, but I think doubt is something that God can redeem in this process. I think as well it can expose within us the difference between our confessional theology and our functional theology, what we say we believe and what we actually believe. Again, I think this is something that questioning and interrogating and doubt can actually help us with that process. But I think part of the problem in this is that we tend not to be theologically very well thought through. We're very fond of that verse, aren't we, in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, that tells us that we should always be able to give an answer for the things that we believe, for the questions that people have for us. The problem is that very often, as Christians, we think we know what it is we're supposed to believe, but we're not always very sure on why we believe it. So I'm not sure we always can give an answer. And when we're pushed and challenged, and when those questions come, if we don't have answers, then we are going to have doubts. Now, part of the problem is that I think, and I say this with respect, but I think a lot of us have never really grown past a Sunday school faith. Now, a Sunday school faith is fine if you're 4 or 5 or 6 years old. But if you're a teenager, if you're an adult, and you're facing the kinds of questions that teenagers and adults have to navigate and negotiate sometimes on a daily basis, a Sunday school faith is simply not going to cut it. You cannot have a Sunday school level faith in the reality of an adult's world. And if you try, then there will be doubt and uncertainty and insecurity. Now we can present that as a virtue. Oh, I just love Jesus. I don't need to have all this theology in place. I disagree. It's not good enough. I think the reality of life and the reality of the questions that we face in our world today, if we are to have integrity as Christians, we need a robust, rigorous, well-informed, and well thought through faith that is rooted in the Scriptures. I have to be able to understand not just what I believe, but why I believe it. Anything less than that is less than biblical faith.